11 machines, 2 countries, no way to see each other. They drilled toward one another from opposite sides of the English Channel for 11 miles apiece and met in the middle within less than 1 meter. Right now, a train is crossing that same gap from England to France in 35 minutes. Underneath it, 75 meters of chalk and the entire English Channel. 31 miles of solid rock and freezing seawater separate 2 countries that have wanted this tunnel for 200 years. And for 200 years, one side kept saying no. For £0.6 billion became almost 10 billion. The company that built it nearly went bankrupt twice. And on the day it finally opened, it worked exactly as promised. This is how they built it anyway. 1799. A French mining engineer named Albert Mathieu draws the first serious plan for a tunnel under the channel. Horse-drawn carriages, an artificial island halfway across for the horses to change and breathe, oil lamps burning the entire way. Napoleon himself is reportedly intrigued. It goes nowhere. Britain says no. 1880. Engineers actually start digging on both sides of the channel with real steam-powered tunneling machines, boring by hand-lit lamp through soft chalk. They get over a mile in on each side before anyone in London finds out how far it's gone. Britain's own military shuts it down. The fear isn't engineering, it's invasion. A tunnel is a bridge for an army, and Britain hasn't been successfully invaded by land in living memory. They intend to keep it that way for the next 100 years. Nearly every decade produces a new proposal, and every one dies the same way. 1922, right after the First World War. 1930, backed by serious engineering studies. 1957, in the shadow of the Cold War, when an underground route into Britain sounds even more dangerous than it did in Napoleon's time. Each attempt gets funded a little, studied a lot, and quietly killed by the same anxiety that killed the first one 70 years earlier. 1974 gets closer than any of them. Britain and France actually agree. Tunneling machines go back into the ground on both coasts, and a real pilot tunnel gets dug for over half a mile. Then Britain's economy collapses into a currency crisis. A new government inherits the mess, and the whole project gets cancelled again, with the tunneling machines simply left behind, sealed inside the rock they'd already cut. By the 1980s, the case has flipped completely. Air travel and cross-channel ferries dominate. Old invasion fears feel almost quaint. And a fixed link could save millions of trucks a year from queuing for hours at British and French ports. 1986.
For 200 years, every plan for this tunnel died the same way. Not from bad engineering, but from fear of what a tunnel could let in.
British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and French President François Mitterrand signed the treaty that finally makes it real, choosing a private consortium's rail tunnel design over rival proposals for a bridge, and even one for a combined bridge and tunnel hybrid. One condition Thatcher insists on before she'll sign anything: not £1 of British taxpayer money. The entire project has to be privately financed, start to finish, or it doesn't happen at all. That single condition will nearly sink the whole project a decade later. But first, they have to build it. Watch how they actually pulled this off. The route has to thread a single narrow layer of rock called chalk marl, running under the seabed the entire way across. Too high, and you hit unstable, water-bearing ground closer to the surface. Too low, and you hit chalk so hard and so fractured it destroys the cutting heads. Miss that layer anywhere along 31 miles, and the whole tunnel is compromised permanently, with no way to go back and fix it later.
There is one layer of rock that works. Everything above it floods, everything below it destroys the machine.
11 tunnel boring machines, among the largest ever built at the time. 6 starting from the English side, 5 from the French, cutting 3 parallel tunnels each. 2 full-size tunnels for high-speed trains running in opposite directions, and one smaller service tunnel running between them for ventilation, drainage, cabling, and emergency escape. Each boring machine is its own underground factory, longer than 2 football fields end to end, grinding through rock at the front while an entire crew erects curved concrete tunnel lining behind it, ring by ring, without ever stopping the advance. There is no way to see the other machines coming from France. No satellite signal reaches this deep under rock and water. Every meter has to be tracked by laser-guided theodolites and gyroscopic compasses, recalculated constantly, with surveyors trusting the math completely because there is no way to physically check it until the machines are close enough to hear each other through solid rock. A boring machine drifts off its planned line early in the project, discovered only when a routine survey shot comes back wrong. Crews stop the machine, recalibrate the guidance system from scratch, and correct course gradually over the next several hundred meters, rather than risk a sudden turn that could crack the tunnel lining already in place. Left uncorrected, the English and French tunnels would have missed each other entirely, 30 stories under the seabed, with no way to know until it was far too late.
We were driving 2 machines toward each other for 11 miles apiece, blind, trusting nothing but lasers and gyroscopes to get it right.
Workers spend entire shifts miles from open sky, in tunnels barely wide enough for the machines that dug them, breathing air pumped in through pipes stretching back to the nearest shaft in England or France. Temperatures inside climb steadily the deeper the machines go, and the noise from the cutting heads never fully stops. 10 workers died during construction across both countries, cave-ins, machinery accidents, the ordinary brutal math of tunneling at this scale, on a project pushing tunneling technology further than it had ever gone. Their names are read aloud at the opening ceremony years later, December 1st, 1990. After roughly 3 years of boring from both directions, a service tunnel worker on the French side.
You stop thinking about how far you are from the sky. You just think about the next meter of rock.
Breaks through the final wall of chalk separating the 2 countries and shakes hands with a British worker on the other side, for the first time in human history, connecting the island of Britain to mainland Europe by solid land. The survey math is off by less than 1 meter horizontally after driving 2 machines toward each other for over 11 miles apiece, guided by nothing but lasers, gyroscopes, and trust in the numbers, deep enough underground that a single miscalculation would have been unrecoverable. Once a boring machine finishes its run, there's no practical way to reverse 200 meters of machine back out through the tunnel it just built. Several of the machines are simply driven sideways off the main alignment into purpose-dug side chambers, disconnected, and abandoned in the rock forever. Multi-million-pound machines, entombed a few dozen meters from the tunnel they helped create. Because digging them back out would cost more than leaving them behind. It's not finished. It's barely...
When that gap opened and I saw daylight from the French side, that was 31 miles of blind trust, proven right in 1 moment.
Behind the boring machines, an entirely separate army of engineers has to turn 3 empty rock tunnels into a working railway. Rail lines laid to tolerances tight enough for trains running well over 100 miles an hour. Overhead power cables strung the entire 31-mile length. Ventilation systems massive enough to move breathable air through the whole tunnel continuously, pushing stale air out one end while pulling fresh air in the other. Cross passages built every 375 meters, connecting all 3 tunnels. So a train failure anywhere along the route has a sealed, breathable escape path within a short walk. 2 massive terminals get built almost from nothing. One at Folkestone in England, one at Coquelles near Calais in France. Each one bigger than a small town, with its own customs checkpoints, loading platforms, and control towers, built purely to funnel cars and trucks onto shuttle trains and send them underground on a rolling schedule every few minutes at peak times. Before a single pane passenger boards, Engineers spend months running empty test trains through the tunnel around the clock, deliberately pushing systems past their limits, simulating power failures, blocked tunnels, onboard fires, checking that every safety system responds exactly the way it's supposed to, with nobody's life riding on the answer yet. Cooling becomes its own crisis nobody fully planned for. Friction from constant train traffic, plus geothermal heat naturally trapped in the surrounding rock, pushes tunnel temperatures far higher than the original design ever accounted for. Engineers have to retrofit an enormous refrigeration system mid-project, pumping chilled water through pipes running the length of the tunnel, just to keep the tunnel itself from overheating the trains running through it. By the early 1990s, the private company financing all of this, Eurotunnel.
The tunnel was never the risk everyone worried about. The money was.
Burning through cash faster than banks are willing to lend it. Construction costs blow past every original estimate, driven by the cooling retrofit, tougher than expected ground conditions, and a fixed opening date that leaves no room for delay. What was budgeted at £4.6 billion ends up costing close to 10. Because of Thatcher's one condition, there is no government bailout available. None. If Eurotunnel runs out of cash, the tunnel simply doesn't open, no matter how much of it is already dug and lined and wired. A syndicate of over 200 banks, plus hundreds of thousands of small shareholders who bought in during construction, pour in round after round of emergency financing just to keep the machines running. Nobody outside the project is fully sure it will actually get finished on the money available. May 6, 1994. Queen Elizabeth II and President Mitterrand formally opened the Channel Tunnel, meeting at the halfway point beneath the sea before the ceremony moves above ground. For the first time since the last ice age, Britain is physically connected to the European mainland. Crowds lined the terminals on both sides that day, and the first official passenger trains crossed within the week, carrying ordinary travelers through a route that engineers, politicians, and military planners had argued over for 2 centuries. The engineering worked. The finances almost did.
The engineering worked exactly as designed on day one. It was the finances that took years to recover. After the
Within
fire,
a few
we
years,
didn't just repair the damage.
Eurotunnel is
We
drowning
rebuilt
in
the
debt it
entire
can't
safety
service.
system
Weighed
around the
down by
assumption that
construction
it could
costs,
happen
nearly
again.
double the original budget and years of over-optimistic passenger and freight forecasts that never fully materialized. 1997. The company is forced into one of the largest debt restructurings in British corporate history, converting billions of pounds of debt into shares just to keep operating. Shareholders who backed the project during construction watched most of their investment evaporate on paper, almost overnight. The tunnel that connected 2 countries almost bankrupted the company that built it. Then, November 18, 1996, a heavy truck riding the freight shuttle catches fired deep inside the tunnel. Temperatures inside the affected section spike above 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to soften structural steel. No one dies, but the tunnel lining is severely damaged along a significant stretch, and the Channel Tunnel closes for months of repair. Its safety record suddenly in serious public doubt just 2 years after opening. Engineers respond by rebuilding entire sections of tunnel lining, upgrading fire suppression systems throughout, and rewriting emergency evacuation procedures still in use today. 2 more serious fires, in 2006 and 2008, test those upgrades again, on freight shuttles carrying similarly dangerous cargo. The tunnel survives all of them, reopens each time, and keeps running.
After the fire, we didn't just repair the damage. We rebuilt the entire safety system around the assumption that it could happen again.
Decades later, a different crisis arrives, one nobody engineered for at all. Thousands of migrants gathering near Calais, some risking their lives trying to cross through, alongside, or on top of freight trains heading into the tunnel, in search of a new life in Britain. The operators respond with miles of new security fencing, thermal cameras, infrared detection, and expanded patrols. An entire second layer of infrastructure, built decades after the tunnel opened, just to secure the first one. Today, the Channel Tunnel carries more than...
Nobody who built this tunnel in the 1980s designed it to stop people crossing on foot. That problem came decades later.
million passengers a year on Eurostar trains alone, plus close to 1.6 million trucks a year through the freight shuttle, moving goods between Britain and mainland Europe every single day, without a single ferry crossing. It now handles roughly a quarter of all trade between the UK and the European Union by value. A crossing that once took an entire day by boat, weather permitting, now takes 35 minutes underground, rain or shine, in every season, without a single trip canceled for rough seas since the day it opened. 31 miles.
My grandfather's generation was told this could never be built. I helped build it. My grandchildren ride through it and don't think about it at all.
2 centuries of false starts before anyone broke ground for good. 11 boring machines, guided only by lasers and trust, meeting in the middle, within less than a meter of error after 11 miles of blind digging apiece. A private company that nearly went bankrupt twice building the thing it's now famous for. And every day, in 35 minutes, a train does what a French engineer first sketched out on paper over 200 years earlier, and what an entire country spent a century convinced it could never allow. If you want to understand how engineers solve the problems everyone else calls impossible, this is that channel. Subscribe to Global Factory Process. New, impossible engineering every week.